My name is Danielle Eiler.
Danielle, and you've got quite a story really with your children.
Not as bad as most people, but it's still an eye-opener.
Injury is injury,
right?
So we don't judge on what's worse than others. So, how many children do you have?
I had 3 boys, born in 88, 90, and 92. So we're going back a little ways.
All right, and so how were they before any of them were vaccine injured?
Well, I never knew they were vaccine injured, so that's my revelation. I became a grandmother last year, and during the process of that anticipation, I decided to do some research because I had heard bits and pieces, and I heard about your movie and various things were going on, and the more research I did, the more shocked I was. The more connections I started making. I'm like, oh my goodness, my son had that. My son had that. I had 3 boys. So boys, for some reason, do seem to be more susceptible to vaccine injuries. But starting with my first one, we had learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder. We had this very bright child, and then when he went into the school system, he was falling behind. Didn't realize he couldn't see. He just had so many issues that we were stunned by. I was stunned by when I realized that they were vaccine related.
Do you remember the vaccines that your first son had?
He did not have nearly what is on the schedule now, but he had like the MMR, the DTaP, the polio. Did not have flu shots, but I wish I had all those records where I could go back and make connections. But he had thrush when he was an infant. He had a lazy eye in all of his baby pictures. We can see the lazy eye. He had scarlet fever. Who gets scarlet fever? He had scarlet fever. He had roseola. He had these little rashes and things, and we didn't understand that was vaccine related. We understand this now. My husband and I both have investigated this very thoroughly. Our second son ended up in the emergency room twice as an infant, once with the croup and once with 105-degree fever. Very scary times for a mother and father. And he had delayed speech, and he was like 2 years old, and he wasn't talking. And I thought, well, I just thought it was him. Had no idea that was vaccine related. He ended up going into speech therapy for several years, and then by the time we had our third boy, the vaccine schedule had apparently increased, because by the time we had the third son, he was getting more vaccines and he was showing more injuries. We just never made the connection. And the saddest part for me is that I thought I had a bad child. I thought I had a bad child because he was a screamer. He did that blood-curdling scream. He wouldn't sleep through the night. He did the head banging. He had horrible ear infections. He had stuff oozing out of his ears. He had ear infection after ear infection after ear infection. He had digestive issues. He too had speech therapy. It was just crazy. And my middle son, I forgot to mention, he had mononucleosis when he was 5 years old. Mono. I had to keep him home from school for a whole month.
What exactly is that?
That's it's supposed to be a kissing disease. So, it's like a contagious disease, but it's an autoimmune disorder. So I don't know this for sure. I've never seen any specific research on it, but I think it's vaccine related. That's just my opinion.
Let's talk more about your older son, because it's a really sad story. So he struggled, he had learning difficulties, but he came out of school and...
Well, he was really quite remarkable. He overcame, and I do want to point that out, that all 3 of my children overcame their injuries. These were when they were very young. And I had a wonderful boss who was, so liberal with me on leaving work for doctor's appointments, picking them up from school early, whatever was necessary. So I was one of the lucky ones, but I did sacrifice a lot in trying to make sure my kids were always, taken care of. And my oldest son, he was a very, his name was Travis. He was a very hard-working individual, and he became a runner, and he went to college. He overcame his learning disabilities pretty well. He worked really hard, and went to college on a scholarship, and he graduated from college with honors. and he became a missionary, and he went overseas, and his life goal was to serve the Lord. He wanted to be a disciple for Jesus, and he was in Kazakhstan, and it was his third trip over there. He's 23 years old, and he was living there, and one day they found him in his apartment with a plastic bag over his head and a sheet tied around his neck, and he had been suffocated. So that was just amazingly disappointing, horrific. You know, and I wish we would ask more questions, just like with vaccinations. We trusted that he was doing something good with his life, so we didn't question it. We just, you know, we encouraged it. If anything, we wanted him to do what he wanted to do, and that was his dream, was to make. He wanted to. Okay, the country was less than 1% Christian. It was mostly Muslim, and he wanted to make sure the Muslims knew Jesus. Beautiful soul.
Tragic.
Just horrendous. Yes.
We're really, truly sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. He was a good kid.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because his two brothers were both in college at the same time. And one was a sophomore, one was a junior. And one of them went back to school. He was going away to school. He was in Charleston, and he could not focus. He was just so distraught. And then the other one was going to school here locally at Coastal Carolina University, and he went the next 6 semesters and never made a B. He made straight A's for 6 semesters straight. And we're like, where did that come from? You know, it's just amazing. And he's doing well. But one thing I do wonder about with vaccinations is judgment. How much does it impair judgment? Because my first one had this free spirit that he could go do things that were dangerous. My second one has had judgment issues that we won't really go into. They're not that bad, but there's still judgment issues. And my third one is he's into extreme sports. He does those Spartan races that are like in the mud and going up hills and running 10 and 20 miles, and he does crazy things. He did crazy things when he was an infant, when he was a toddler. So I wonder about judgment. That's a big question I have. How much are the vaccines causing judgment issues? We say this generation is, you know, that they're disrespectful, and that they're, you know, that they don't care about things, and we make a lot of comments about this generation of the 20-somethings, the millennials. But how much of it could be related to vaccinations? That's a question I would love to know. And the real problem I have with vaccinations, now that I have discovered what I've discovered, I have a grandson now. He's 11 months old, precious little thing, and they are vaccinating him. And I've tried to speak up about it, and they won't listen to me. And we've gotten in some battles over it. There's been some issues. This is my middle son, the one who I said he has some judgment issues as well. But anyway, they have given that baby over 20 vaccinations.
Over 20 vaccinations.
Over 20 vaccinations, 11 months old, and he's due for his MMR next month. And he's going to be a year old November 4th, and he's due for that MMR. And I did get them to watch the Vaxxed movie. I bought it. And
did they actually watch it?
My son watched it, and she watched part of it. But she's starting to open up now because she had some pictures made, and guess what? Baby has a lazy eye. She pointed it out to me. He's starting to develop a lazy eye, and I just responded back by saying, vaccinations. And she just looked at me, and I don't want to be that mother-in-law. I don't want to be that person who's going to be, you know, harassing them or telling them what to do or how to raise their kids. And that's kind of the perception that we've gotten. So, you know, I'm walking a careful line there, but I'm also a very outspoken type person. And I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut, especially if it's something that I've researched and that I really feel strongly about. And so that's been an issue. And now, in the last 2 weeks, he's developed a rash, and it's eczema. Oh, that's another thing. My youngest son had a terrible eczema problem, terrible. He had it right in the crevices of his arms, and it was just oozing out all the time. Terrible, terrible. Took him to a dermatologist. How many different doctors do we go to with vaccine injuries? That's a big question. How many extra dollars are we spending because the original doctor injured our child? And I know these doctors don't do it intentionally. In fact, if they knew what they were doing, if they really, really knew what they were doing, I think we'd have a catastrophe or something. I don't know what we would have. We would have something pretty major going on, because I have friends. I have a friend right now who's a pediatrician, and when I try to bring up vaccines with her, she cuts me off pretty quick. Pretty quick. And I don't want to argue with people. I just want to educate them.
Everybody here thinks you're amazing.
Oh, really?
They want you to be that mother-in-law because you're fighting for your grandchildren.
Well, that's where my head is, for sure.
You've got to keep talking. You're really good at talking. You're really sorry you've had such a tragic situation.
Thank you.
Your older son is devastating.
Devastating. And I would like to add something too. I've always had problems with pharmaceutical drugs and things and so forth. And my mother was going through menopause. She hadn't been to a doctor in years. She was 54 years old. She was going through menopause, and I encouraged her to go see a doctor and see if he could help her. She went to a doctor. He put her on synthetic hormones, and she died from her synthetic hormones. She got a blood clot to the lung. They call that a pulmonary embolism, and it killed her at 54 years old. So I mean, our whole medical industry really needs a wake-up call. And the mandates are just ridiculous. That's really where we've got to...
You need to read Suzanne Humphrey's book, people. It's exactly about all of this.
Absolutely.
You must go to that and read it. It will endorse everything you're saying, and you will be horrified by what goes on in the hospital. The doctors. So, okay, now have you signed the bus for your 3 boys?
I have not signed the bus.
Well, we must do that.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Thank you, Polly.